Hey, what's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up. Anthony Sanfilippo's here. I'm Bob Wankel. Recording early on a Monday morning, one in which the Phillies can go to the World Series tonight. It's kind of like funny, like the way that the series has progressed. It goes out west, go out to the desert, and there was this reset day. Everybody in this city turned their attention to the Eagles for 24 hours, and now that's over. And it's like, oh, by the way, Monday, 5 o'clock, you can go to the World Series. Like that, it's kind of just such a weird dynamic. And we were talking before the show started here. Like, is there a take on the 5 o'clock start time? And I guess, I know what you just said to me, but if you want to put it out there for the people listening, it is strange because we saw against the Braves the early start time. People were a little bit slow getting in. They certainly weren't lathered up the way that they were for the later start times, meaning they weren't as drunk. Not that everybody down there is ripped, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to overstate that, but it just didn't quite have the same edge with the early start time. So I guess I'm kind of curious. Do you expect, given what's at stake, that place to be packed from the start? Do you expect it to have that same type of edge, even with the earlier start time, or what else do you make of it?
I'm not 100% sure, Bob. The only thing that, my initial reaction was this is a terrible start time. And that was back when the actual schedule came out. Like I kind of understood the 5 o'clock. And well, first of all, I understand why they're doing it, right? You have a game 7 in the American League that's tonight, and obviously that's the game you want in prime time. And I kind of understood a game earlier in the series out in Arizona starting at 5 o'clock our time because it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon out there. Like, okay, well, if you have to have a day game out there, it's a weird start time for us, but I get it. But to go with a potential World Series clinching game at 5 o'clock Eastern with the game in the Eastern time zone makes very little sense to me. And the idea that you need to isolate each game out so that they get watched in their entirety is, I think, is kind of flawed because I'm not certain that there are people who are like, I got to watch first inning 1 to inning 9 of both of these games. I think that there you could get away with a little bit of a crossover time, maybe an hour and a half in between games, so you can guarantee that you get to see the end of both games, but you might miss the beginning of the first one. And I'm getting to the point that, and I'm sorry I'm being long-winded, but I'm getting to the point that for Philadelphia, there to me, you worry maybe that because we saw it in the Atlanta series that didn't quite have that vibe, that feel right at that 5 o'clock start. The only thing I thought might maybe, and this is a maybe, because the Eagles played Sunday Night Football at home last night, and that game doesn't get over till after 11 o'clock, 11:30, whatever it was, that maybe that more people took today as either an off day from work or a work from home type day, which will allow those folks to get down to the ballpark in plenty of time for a 5 o'clock start. But that's by no means a guarantee. It's just what was rummaging through my head.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm thinking this because it's the Phillies in this game tonight, but you go back to what ESPN did with Monday Night Football when the Eagles and Bucks played a few weeks back, and they were toggling back and forth between Rams, Bengals, and Eagles, Bucks. And I almost kind of wonder, or I sort of feel like that Major League Baseball is missing an opportunity to do something unique here, like where you could package it on a different station and say, like, okay, you can watch either game individually, or we're going to give you an opportunity to kind of bounce back and forth as these games progress. Like, it's only 2 games, so I don't want to say it's a red zone feel, but you could watch these games simultaneously, kind of just ping pong back and forth with one another. I don't like it. I was disappointed last night, frankly, that the Rangers won the game. For a couple of reasons, I'd like to see the Phillies play the Houston Astros if they reach the World Series, and I would have liked to have seen this game start at 8:07. Now, I know that we have people out here listening that are like, well, I can get to a TV at 5 o'clock. I'm good to go. But I just think that for most people, they don't want to stay up till 11:15, 11:30, fine. But if the alternative is you're driving your kids to soccer practice, you're feeding your baby, you're racing home from work to get to the TV in time, it kind of just sucks. I mean, like, especially because this is not something that happens all the time. I mean, 93, 08, 09, 22, 23, those are the 5 times that this could happen in my lifetime, and I think it kind of is not representative of the of the moment and what's at stake. Now, I guess it's kind of like we sound like we're complaining. It's not really the most pressing thing here, but I don't know. I was a little bit put off by that, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I am too. I mean, nobody wants to. Look, some writers are going to sit there and say, "This is great. You get home early after the game, right?"
Home by 9:30.
Yeah, I get it, right, and that's fine. But I mean, I'm not looking at it from a selfish perspective. Okay, I'm not. I'm looking at it from a perspective of what's best for this market. And starting a game at 5 o'clock, knowing how hard it is to drive in this area to begin with. And I'm not saying South Philly. I don't want that people to think I'm saying that it's hard to drive down there. It's only hard to drive down there when you have 3 events going at once, which we saw last week, right? But no, getting to the ballpark, it's the highways that get bad at that time because it's rush hour. Yeah. So you're dealing with that extra annoyance factor. You don't get an opportunity to really be like tailgating unless you took off all day, which is part of the charm of a playoff baseball and really kind of taking in the environment leading up to it. All of that just kind of sucks that people just get cheated a little bit, right?
Well,
and that's what bothers me.
I'll tell you who might be excited about it would be the people at Xfinity Live, because if they do win the game, it's gonna extend the runway of the post-game celebration down there. So
yes, Xfinity Live with their $20 door entry fee.
Yeah,
cover charge.
Sure.
You have to charge a cover charge to go into a place that you're going to spend couple $100 that night anyway. Like
people will pay it.
Makes 0 sense to me. It's
people will pay it.
Extortion, baby. It's all it is.
All right. So we talked on Friday morning. That was the last time that we recorded, and that was after game 3, the 2-1 loss. And you thought, okay, well, that's quite a gut punch, but they're still all right. You got you feel all right with what they had going. You felt all right with the idea that the offense was going to bounce back in game 4, and it did. And they carried a late lead in the later innings of game 4, and then they blew it. And then you wrote the piece with the song, and it was quite lengthy, but it was good. I think a lot of people in the city probably needed to read something that was a little bit like the sky isn't falling. And they come back and they win game 5 to set up this clinching scenario tonight. I guess because we haven't talked since Friday morning, 2 games have gone by. What were the big takeaways for you over the weekend? Because I have one, and I think that this will really hit with our readers. I don't want to see Craig Kimbrel throw an important inning for this team for the remainder of the playoffs, or frankly ever. That is a take that I have, and I don't think that it's like overreaction Monday either. He is brutal, and we got to go down there and cover it and all that stuff. And I guess maybe that's not the most nuanced way of saying this, but I don't have time to mince words today. Keep Craig Kimbrel away from anything important moving forward. That's my take.
I think you're going to see him at some point again in the playoffs here, Bob. I don't think it's going to be.
Hopefully, it's protecting an 8-1 lead.
Well, no, it's I don't want to make it sound like they're just going to. They're all of a sudden now he goes by the way of Lorenzen and
I don't. How do you put him out there for real? Like, I know that there's a lot of good things to talk about. Like, they're going to win this. I mean, they have a chance to win the series tonight. And I apologize to people who are listening to this that are all excited. I was just like, you know what? This is the thing that I walked away from this weekend. If they win this series, keep this guy away. Like, I really.
And I get it.
What an absolutely atrocious performance by him. I mean, truly.
And I get it. And I understand everybody's vitriol with him, and I think it was a terrible 2 games out in Arizona by Craig Kimbrel, and I feel like it was something that's been coming. When we talked about how he got through September, allowing as few earned runs as he did, like it was a tightrope walk. Yeah, it was a tightrope walk. Like we've been over this. That being said, can the Phillies truly afford to trim their bullpen yet another arm? And they're already trying to do this with 11 pitchers as it is. Now you're saying, okay, do it with 10. You start to get to a point where it's like, oh man, like you can't really get through 8 more games with those few pit. And I know the old folks are going to sit there and say, guys my age, well, they did it before in the old days. They just do this. I don't want to hear that. That's not how 2023 is done. Do I think he's in as high leverage spots? I don't, but I do think you're going to see Craig Kimbrel come into games, and maybe a little bit more lower leverage or earlier, maybe earlier in a game, to try and get out of an inning. But he's going to pitch. Get ready. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I get it in game 3. I do. He had to that point survived. He had navigated some tough situations. He had navigated a difficult situation against the Braves. Johan Rojas, I think to some degree, bailed him out in that game. You come back though on Friday night, and for it to happen again in just what was a truly wretched inning. I mean, we talked about it on Friday morning with game 3. The inability to pitch to the clock. Real Muto has to go out there and bail him out. Can't hold on the runner. These are the things that you worried about with Craig Kimbrel. And then it all kind of comes to fruition in game 3. And then for him to come back out in game 4, he gives it the home run, and then he continues to light the thing on fire beyond it. It was truly remarkable to watch it unfold. And so, yes, if there's a situation where it's earlier in the game, multi-run deficit, multi-run lead, fine, sure, I guess. But the days of I want to attack this 8th inning pocket with Craig Kimbrel up 1, I just don't think you can do it anymore. It's not a character attack. I mean, I guess I sound somewhat, aggressive here, but it's nothing against him as a human being. There's a championship at stake, and I don't think that Craig Kimbrel gives you the best opportunity to win one if he's pitching high leverage innings. That's probably what I should have said 3 minutes ago, but I mean, that's good. The bottom line, man. That's where I came away from it. Now, the other big takeaway, though, obviously on the positive side, is the rebound on Saturday night, and it was an impressive one. It looked more like the team that we had seen through the first 8 games of the playoffs, hitting a ton of home runs, great starting pitching. And then they lock up the final few outs late. We've talked about it for years now. This is a very resilient team. We know that. We saw it on display yet again. Do we feel like that the Game 5 win has effectively put them in the driver's seat, that there should be a reasonable expectation that this team's going to the World Series?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think you're coming home. And you only have to win one of 2 games at home where you haven't lost the entire postseason, right? So what makes anybody think that all of a sudden you're going to lose 2? So yes, they are in the driver's seat. I do think that there is a smaller margin for error at this point because obviously Arizona is going to be in desperation mode. I don't think you're going to see 10-0 tonight in the same pitching matchup that you had in game 2. I think it's probably going to be a lot closer than that. But at the same time, I do think that the Phillies have control at this point. I think they'll win tonight. I think they'll lock it out tonight and advance to the World Series. But I also see, I got to give Arizona a little bit of credit. I mean, I do feel like the Phillies gave them 2 wins. I don't feel like Arizona took 2 wins. Like they went out and beat the Phillies. I felt
that way more after game 4. I felt like the Phillies said, "Here you go." In game 4, game 3, you come out and you get 3 hits. I can't tell.
Fought pitched really well. I mean, you got to give Fought credit. I mean, he pitched well in game 3, but I still think the Phillies handed it to them late in the game. Arizona didn't hit, right, and then all of a sudden they won a game. And then in game 4, Arizona didn't hit for 7 innings, and then all of a sudden they won a game, right? So I feel like the Phillies did hand them both, and it's okay to me in a playoff, a 7-game series. It's okay if you hand away 1 game to a team that's really inferior to you, but 2 is where it's like, okay, that's your limit. I mean, you've now used up all of your 2 mulligans. You've used them both up, so that's the thing. It's like the Phillies have put themselves in a comfortable spot, but not too comfortable here, and I think they got to go out there and win this game tonight.
Do you so it's interesting that you say that, because it's actually kind of right where I was going with the next talking point, which is, do you buy into the notion that if the Phillies do not win tonight and do not close this game out here, and they have to play their second elimination game in this postseason run over 2 years, that they really are now backs against the wall? Arizona can kind of come in and say, we weren't supposed to be here, house money, and it's the Phillies that are tight. It's the Phillies who are in a kind of a disadvantage despite the environment, despite that you'll have Ranger Suarez going. There's a lot to still feel good about a potential Game 7. But do you really feel like, man, if they don't get it done tonight, like what's the mindset coming into this?
Yeah, I don't think that this team gets tight. Even last year, when their backs were against the wall against Houston, I didn't think that the team played tight in that game, Bob.
Mhm.
I obviously go back to it. I mean, they lose the game when Alvarez hits the home run off of Alvarado, and that's the game. But I don't feel like the team was tight up to that point, right? I mean, it was good baseball. It was a good baseball game. So I don't think that they get to that point. I mean, your fans might get tight, right? The city might be, the real puckered up buttholes, right? I mean, you're gonna have that going on, but I don't see the team going that way. And so, Game 7s are Game 7s. Anything can happen. We know that. But I don't think that there's a mentality that changes with the Phillies. I think they still approach everything the same way.
What do you expect out of Aaron Nola tonight? Is it more of the same? Does he go out there and further cement his place as a big game pitcher and a franchise? I mean, if he goes out there and gives you 7 shutout tonight, we're starting to talk about him, I think, in a different tier all of a sudden. I mean, what do you think happens here?
Yeah, I mean, I do, because the one thing is that nobody's hitting the Phillies in the playoffs. I mean, even with the bullpen struggles, their team ERA is under 2. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, so I do expect Nola to continue to do what he's been doing, and I expect the pitching staff to continue to do what it's doing. When you have 2 good games against the Miami Marlins in the wild card, you're like, okay, well, that's great, but it's the Marlins offense. Then you shut down the Braves, and you're like, wow, that's pretty impressive. Arizona hasn't really. What has Arizona had, like a breakout offensive game? I mean, we're going into Game 6, 5 games. They haven't. I mean, they had one big home run by what's his name?
Thomas.
Alek Thomas. Yeah. That's it. I mean, other than that, what has Arizona done over 5 games offensively? So I think that the Phillies have a really good approach with their pitching, and so therefore I can't sit here and say, oh, well, I think this could be the Nola blow-up game. Now, could it happen? Of course it could happen, but I can't use any precedent here in this postseason to say that got to be careful that the Phillies give up a bunch of runs. I don't see it happening. I just think I think we're in low score game mode at this point. And I think tonight will be a lower scoring game overall, and I think Nola will do a good job.
I'm trying to compartmentalize these games and look at them separately in a vacuum, because I think we keep, I to some degree, and I think a lot of people are guilty of thinking that there is a correlation game over game here, where you get to the end of Game 2 last week and you say, all right, well, this is over. They're going to win this thing in 4 or 5. Arizona doesn't stand a chance. And then the offense doesn't translate in Game 3. It doesn't carry over. The momentum stopped. Then they blow Game 4 and you think, like they might have just blown their chance to go to the World Series. And then they come back on Saturday night and they have a convincing win in which Bryce Harper goes off, Kyle Schwarber goes off, and they look like the team that you had expected to see out there from the start, as early as Game 3. And I don't want to do, and I think that the pivot from Game 4 to Game 5, I think, is a really clear illustration of how we tend to maybe overreact to what we're watching and thinking that it actually means something as you project out. After Game 4, I really do think a lot of people felt like they blew it. They're done. And then after Game 5, it's like, oh yeah, we got them now, and everyone's excited again. And I think that it's quite clear that momentum is not real. I think that the Phillies' home field advantage is real. I think that there's a true belief that they feel almost to some degree invincible out there. The 2022 World Series notwithstanding. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself and say, like, wow, they made their point in Game 5 and now Arizona's going to come in here and roll over. I just don't see it that way.
No, nor should you see it that way. I don't think Arizona is going to roll over. I think you can break them. I think you can break their will by having a good outing offensively, and that's, I think, what I think is going to be even more integral to tonight's game than talking about Aaron Nola. I mean, again, the Phillies pitching staff in the play. I finally pulled it up just for statistical clarity. 1.78 ERA for the entire playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Of the 4 remaining teams, the next closest is Texas at 3.64. Okay. Their whip, the Phillies whip, 0.997 pitching. All right. Next closest is Houston at 1.156. So it's a full tenth of a point worse. The Phillies have only allowed 6 home runs the entire postseason. Okay, 11 games, only 6. I mean, let's just think about that for a second. Okay, the next closest of the teams remaining is Texas, who's allowed 11, almost twice as many. So I don't think this is going to be about the pitching. I think this is going to be about the lineup and going out there against Merrill Kelly, who when we talked about it after game 2, actually pitched a pretty decent game for Arizona against the Phillies. And so that's, to me, the matchup that's most important tonight. How does the lineup do against him a second time in a week in the same ballpark? And if the Phillies jump out on him and they get him early, then I think, they can break the Diamondbacks. If they don't, you're looking at another 9-inning dogfight tonight.
Yeah. I have a question, or I guess an observation and then a question. So, I peruse the odds, and I'm constantly looking and seeing what the betting apps are saying about individual matchups and individual markets. And I see the game 7 tonight between the Rangers and the Astros, which has really been back and forth. It's been a good series. You thought Houston might be able to bury them last night. They didn't. The Rangers with a huge response. And you go, Christian Javier has been pretty good in the playoffs versus Max Scherzer. And I see that the Astros are minus 125 tonight to win game 7. So they're a slight favorite. I think it's a nod to them being at home. I think it's a nod to them being a team that has just consistently excelled in big spots over the last 7 years. That is not a convincing line to me. In fact, I look at that and say, damn, they're only minus 125 to win this game. That feels a little short. I look at the Phillies odds, and I see minus 192. Aaron Nola over Merrill Kelly tonight.
Yeah.
That is a massive, especially this time of year, with a pretty good pitcher on the opposite side. That is a massive number. I mean, that's almost 2-1.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do this thing. You can look at point spreads in the NFL and say, oh man, that line tells you all you need to know. They're telling you something, but you're looking at this and you're like, man. And I think you also have to understand that road teams have had so much success in the postseason overall. Now the Phillies have been immune to that when they're at home. But I'm looking at that number tonight and I'm like, you better win this game. I mean, that's something that's like Aaron Nola versus, I don't know, a spot starter for the Marlins in the middle of July at home. That's what that number is, So I look at this and I feel like that your odds makers are certainly telling you something. I don't know if you have any any input on that, but I can get to my question if you don't.
No, I don't have any input as far as why it's that. There's such a disparity between the two.
Dude, they were minus 155 in game 2. It's the same matchup.
Yeah, well, I think that when you also look at game 2, it was the same matchup. The final score was 10-0, right? And so, I mean, that's the easy way to look at it. I think, though, there's a lot more nuance to it. Obviously, they didn't blow out Merrill Kelly. It took them a while to actually score off of him. And they did get a few homers and got him out of the game, but it wasn't like it was Merrill Kelly gave up 7 of those 10 runs either, right? And so I look at it and say that number, if you're a smart bettor, you probably take the Diamondbacks, right, with that number. Just to try and get value on it. I mean, I don't know if there's going into the game, if there's value on betting the Phillies at minus 190 in a game 6.
No, that's a lot to lay. I think you have to probably go with a run line type play if you want to back the Phillies there. But I mean, I just look at it not so much from a betting perspective, but just what those odds indicate. I mean, you are certainly being told that the Phillies ought to win this game tonight.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think that everything else that you talked about is the reason why the number is what it is. The Phillies don't lose at home.
Yeah.
Nola's been great, and and what we said earlier, it's not like Arizona won 2 games from the Phillies. The Phillies kind of gave them a couple games, right? So I understand why the number is where it's at. It actually kind of bothers me a little bit that it's that lopsided. To be honest with you, I'd rather it be a little bit closer.
Trap. It's trap.
Like, what are you going with? What are you telling me there? Like, no problem. It bothers me a little bit. So, what's your question off of that?
Well, I want to know what you think after 5 games in terms of who's going to win NLCS MVP, because sticking along the same theme here,
yeah,
I'm actually surprised at what I'm looking at. Zach Wheeler's turned into outstanding starts, and he has the 4th best odds right now to win NLCS MVP. Fourth.
I would put him second right now.
Yeah. Like a healthy 4th. And then I'm looking at Aaron Nola, who didn't allow a run in game 2, who has an opportunity to essentially pitch them into the World Series tonight. And he has the 8th best odds right now at plus 4,000. Yeah. So here you go. Let me give you a quick run through. And obviously I'm talking about this more because we talked about NLCS MVP predictions prior to this series. So here it is in order. Here are the top 10 guys. Kyle Schwarber minus 160 is the favorite, a substantial favorite. Bryce Harper plus 600 is second best. JT Real Muto has the 3rd best odds right now, plus 750. Wheeler 4th at plus 1,000. Trey Turner plus 1,900. Marte is 2,200. Moreno 4,000. Nola 4,000. Like, Gabriel Moreno has the same odds as Aaron Nola right now to win NLCS MVP. Like, I don't get that. So, I think that what this is telling you is that if the Phillies win this series tonight, short of Aaron Nola throwing 8 shutout innings, Kyle Schwarber's probably going to be your NLCS MVP if they can close this thing out.
Yeah, but it should not be that lopsided. I mean, I guess you hit 5 home runs in an NLCS. I mean, it just kind of becomes like, it's got to be that guy. I mean, but the story of the playoffs is, and every series, including this one, has been the pitching. I don't know how you easily dismiss Wheeler/Nola.
I agree.
If they both,
maybe part of it is that you can't differentiate between the two. Like, how do you give the nod to? And I mean, if Nola throws 7-8 shutout, then Nola's actually had a better series than Wheeler, which is insane,
right?
To say, but I think maybe that's part of it. It's that both of them in this hypothetical would have been so good that it's like, how do you give the nod to one over the other one, especially when you have a guy that mashed 5 home runs sitting in the middle of it. So
yeah,
I think that is something you have to look at. I do want to point out, for as actively and frequently as I am wrong about things, that we are one Phillies win away from me having the 1-2 punch here on the Phils in 6 and Kyle Schwarber MVP prediction.
Yes.
But I will tell you, man, it's funny. Like, I say 6 before the series, knowing that, hey, like, it's this time of year, it's not going to be easy. But then you watch it play out game by game, and you're like, what are we doing?
Well, so
I didn't actually think it was going to take 6 games.
I predicted that, but I don't really believe it.
Yeah,
that's like
I was just trying to sound smart.
that's like someone saying that the Eagles should have had a bigger point spread than 3 points yesterday, and then making the final prediction be 3 points. But anyway, what I want to say to that is that every team that wins, and I wrote about this the other day because I wanted to make everybody feel a little bit better and kind of tell them that they were going to win Game 5, and I look brilliant after the fact. Not always. Sometimes I write stories like that and it gets thrown right back in my face. But the other day it worked. And when you're a championship caliber team, you're at some point you have to overcome adversity in the postseason. Don't know when it's going to manifest itself. Don't know how much adversity you're going to have to face. Some championship teams face a little bit more than others, but at some point they all do. They all face some kind of adversity. This was an adversity for the Phillies. It was an absolute, okay, how are you going to handle this first bit of pressure? And they handled it brilliantly. And so that's why I'm more confident that they're going to, be in the World Series at this point, not just because they have a 1-game lead and they're one win away, but because they've showed that, okay, you put our backs against a wall, we're going to respond with this against the ace pitcher of the other team. Not that Zach Gallen is all that great of a pitcher, but he is technically Arizona's ace, pitching at home where he's done a great job all year. And they went out there and said, okay, let's just smack the ball around on him.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. So, like, to me, that should speak volumes about this Phillies team.
If you get to a game 7, if you don't win tonight, in addition to the pressure and which team has the upper hand from a psychological standpoint and all that stuff, let's just talk about the pitching matchup. Any concerns with Ranger Suarez, or I guess I should say with the Diamondbacks getting a look at Ranger Suarez again? Is that a thing where you say, like, well, look, he's really good, but getting 2 cracks at the same guy 6 days apart is going to be tough. And then on the opposite side of it, the Phillies kept referencing after game 3 that it was essentially impossible to hit a pitcher that you've never seen before, which is why they were able to only muster 2 hits in 6 innings against Brandon Pfaadt. Are they ready to whoop his ass in game 7, or what happens there? Like, how do you view that potential pitching matchup?
No,
we're going to record tomorrow and we
Yeah.
can talk about this then if it were come to be, but it's just a quick thought here on
No,
this.
I'm going to say the same thing I'm going to say that I said prior to game 3, and is that I think it's a matchup that favors the Phillies. I think that, in a game 7, not that we've ever experienced one here in Philadelphia for baseball, but I think in a game 7, all hands are on deck. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a relief appearance from Wheeler in a game 7, if necessary. So, how do I feel about Suarez? I feel about Suarez the way I would feel about Suarez, in any game, that the guy's going to go out there and give you a pretty damn good effort. And if he doesn't have it, they're going to get him out early and then turn it over to everyone else. And everyone else is going to come in and do what they got to do, and like I said, I think that could include an appearance by Wheeler, for an inning or 2, depending on the number of pitches. So, I mean, because that would really be his bullpen day, right? And Bob, so how many pitches do pitchers usually throw during a bullpen?
I
40
guess,
to 50.
30 to 40. Oh yeah, I would say 30 to 40.
Yeah, 40. I think 40 is probably the right number. I might be a little high. You might be a little low. I think it's probably right in the middle. So I say 40 is probably the right number. And so in that case, Zach Wheeler is going to give you a couple innings in relief, in a game 7. So I think that there's inherently an advantage there too, like, because the Phillies have that guy that can shorten a game if necessary in game 7. So I like the matchup. I do. That's why I think that the Phillies, I feel confident tonight. And if for some reason they lose a game tonight, I would feel confident in game 7.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, what do you see on the other side? What do you make of that Houston and Texas series?
I don't know what to make of it, because I know it's happened once before, or at least once before, with the World Series with that was the Washington-Houston series, right? That the road team won every game, if I remember correctly. I think Washington won the first 2 in Houston. Houston won 3 in a row in Washington, and Washington went back to Houston and won 2 more to win the World Series. That is very, very, very rare, and I don't know what to make of it that these teams suddenly play poorly at home. It's been a good series, I guess. Houston's probably going to be without a Brian Abreu out of the bullpen tonight. I mean, he got baseball suspended him 2 games for that nonsense which makes 0 sense to me. He appealed it, so he was able to pitch last night. Then they lose, and now it's like, well, they're going to have the hearing today, and if baseball upholds the suspension, well, all of a sudden one of your best relievers isn't available for game 7 tonight.
He's not available for game 1 next weekend either.
Well, I would think that because of the appeal, they might trim it back to a 1-game suspension as opposed to a 2, right?
I personally feel that he should have gotten 5 games.
Get out. I was going to say I didn't even think it was
from
intentional.
the Phillies' perspective in a World Series match.
Yeah, no, I didn't even think it was intentional. Anyway, it's so hard to go against Houston, Bob. It's so hard to pick against Houston. And I'm not convinced Scherzer's got anything left this season, not to say in his career. I'm saying this season. He came back and didn't look good in game 3. And honestly, I don't know how all of a sudden that changes 5 days later. I'm gonna, and then Javier has been a postseason dynamo.
Yeah.
I think Houston wins the game, but give Texas credit, man. They went into Houston last night and said nope, and just 9-2. I mean, it wasn't even. They were out in front early, and well, Houston got the 1-0 lead, but then it was 3-1 pretty quick, and then they just every time Houston pressured, they got out of it.
Yeah.
And Houston
I
pressured a couple times.
I was going to ask you what you thought about a potential World Series matchup and who's the favorable opponent, but let's table that for now. I don't.
Well, I
think
mean,
all of our people that listen that are into jinxes and karma and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, so maybe we hold off on that part of it.
I would say either. I think
Yeah.
me. I'm on the Phillies train, so I think that I don't think it makes a difference. I think you approach each team a little bit differently, but I do think that the Phillies or Phillies should beat either team.
Yeah.
For what it's worth.
I'm kind of with you on that. All right. Well, I don't know. You got one more thing?
Yeah, I do. I do have one last thing, and it's kind of an off-seasony thing, and it has nothing to do with the Phillies, although there is a Phillies tie, like a connection. What do you make of the Giants getting permission from the Padres to interview Bob Melvin for their managerial position? And then secondly, tying into that, there is conversation that the new Giants hitting coach would be Pat Burrell.
Yeah.
Like both things kind of came out of the blue and surprised me, Bob.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, when you look at Bob Melvin specifically, they certainly had the deep run last year in the playoffs, and then the team was a disaster this year. And I guess the way I look at it is that he certainly would be interested, I guess, in maybe resetting. Maybe they just feel like that's not a fit, and that it would be best for all parties to kind of move forward, right? Like, I mean, how else do you view that? You're talking about a division rival, like saying, like, yeah, you know what, like, go ahead if you want to do that, you want to explore that, then go ahead. I mean,
I just find it weird.
Strange.
Yeah, I find it weird that, well, on two ends, I find it weird from both sides. Like if you're San Francisco, and I know that Farhan Zahidi and Melvin have a past working together and a good working relationship. But I find it weird that you would want a manager who just had a basically internal clubhouse, drama playing out where nobody liked each other. And that's a primary reason why the San Diego Padres missed the playoffs. And say, oh, well, that's what I want. That's the kind of leader I want in our clubhouse now.
Well, that being said, he's still well thought of, and they were also the same organization that, despite a lot of negative talking points against Gabe Kapler, went ahead and said, "Sure, this sounds good." So.
Yeah, I agree. But then if you're the Padres, all along you've been saying that this is the guy we want to be our manager. We obviously like him a lot, and I mean, even AJ Preller, GM, towards the end of the season, where he was talking about how Bob's our guy going forward, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden just say, yeah, go ahead. Go look at that. Oh, and by the way, it's one of our division rivals. So yeah, no worries. Go right ahead. Like it just seems weird on both ends.
It does.
It just seems really odd. And then the whole Pat Burrell thing, Bob, like where does this come from? Like the guy's been out of, really kind of out of the sport for a while. And,
all scouting stuff. And
yeah,
I mean,
all of a sudden now you're going to come in and be a hitting coach?
Well, one thing I will say, I did not, I was too young. I wasn't covering the Phillies at that point or anything like that. But if you would have asked me in 2006 or 7 if Pat Burrell was going to be a future coach, I would have said probably not. It didn't really quite strike me as the natural fit. So I guess I am a little bit surprised to see that news. Yeah.
I mean, I would think that you would want to, if you're going to be a coach, that you would want to test it out at a lower level first and say, is this right for me?
Oh, I got one for you. What do you think about the Boston Red Sox bringing in Gabe Kapler and interviewing him to oversee baseball operations?
I think Kapler is better suited for that, in all honesty, than I do in the dugout, because I do think that I think he's a smart guy who really dives into a lot of stuff, but but I think that you need to let the manager manage the game because he knows his team and knows, and sometimes you're not going to follow the book that
Yeah,
your
I
analytics
think my
department has
concern would
written.
be I don't know that I'd be real eager to take a job as a manager under him because one, we know from a personality
He's a
standpoint how
micromanager.
he's a
Yeah.
micromanager, and I just think you bring a guy in and he's constantly looking at what you're doing, constantly picking it apart. And then also on top of that, just from the perspective of, he says, well, I was a manager too. So he's going to lean into that experience and try to, I just
Well,
don't know. I hear
so
what you're saying in terms of like his skill set being suited for that job. And he is a smart guy. And I think that, yeah, you have to concede that, but man, like, I just don't know.
well, here's how I would view it, Bob. Better that you have one guy as in the manager who hates the way you do things, as opposed to an entire clubhouse of players who hates the way you do things. Right? I mean, in all honesty, let's be honest,
Yeah.
that's what it is. And that's what it comes down to. And I think that because we've said on this show, I mean, we saw it really with the Giants, not really here with the Phillies, but more so with the Giants, that he did have an ability to get more out of less. Right? I guess we did see it with the Phillies in 18, in a sense that they were competitive for 4 months of the season before collapsing.
Mhm.
And that roster was terrible. If you go back and look at that 2018 Phillies roster, it was bad.
It was pretty bad.
So and we looked at the Giants, like even this year, we looked at that roster and we are like, what do they have that they're in this race, right? They got nothing, and yet they were there. But of course, they collapsed, and so the game managing thing leads to the collapse, and I think it's because of the way that how the players deal with him as a manager, especially the pitchers. But if you put in a situation where the manager still is kind of like the go-between, and the manager might not like Gabe, but at the same time, it's one guy that's getting frustrated with him and not the entire team, maybe it does work.
Well, stay tuned on that. It's funny. I will say, like, I feel self-evaluation, self-scouting here towards the end of the show. I don't feel great right now. I have a very bad headache. I wanted to do the show today. I felt like it was important given what's at stake tonight.
Yeah.
I do understand if you're listening to this show today, you say, guy just didn't really have a lot of juice today. He didn't have a lot of energy. This is a team that's supposed to go to the World Series tonight. And this guy comes on and he's like, Fred Kimbrel, what are they doing? Can't use him anymore. I feel like I don't have that usual spunk today, I got to say. And I am aware of it. I'll tell you, I promise if the Phillies win tonight, I will bring it tomorrow. I'll make sure. I didn't get my coffee yet. I just felt like this was a workmanlike effort to record today. I didn't have the fastball, Anthony.
We do record early in the morning, right? So there is that, right? And it's a Monday morning.
I got to do better. It's on me.
A Monday morning. You're coming off of a bachelor party weekend, yet another one, right? So you got to give yourself some grace, man.
Yeah.
Like, understand where you're at life wise, and just say, you know what, I'll get you. I got time to get juiced up. I got another 9-10 hours before I have to really get fired up for baseball. So let's let it be a progression, slow progression.
Well, I promise you, one way or another, tomorrow morning it's going to be there's going to be some energy on that show, because it's going to either be, look at this team, they did it again, wow, or oh boy, here we go.
Yeah. We'll there's only two directions tomorrow.
There's
they're
no
both
middle ground.
Yep.
You better, if you want nuance and two things can be true, you better bring that tomorrow, because I don't think I have that one in me.
That's good. That's fine. I'll be the voice of reason.
All right. Well, for Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. Thank you for listening to Cross Up. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at AntSanPhilly. Follow me at Bob_Wankel. Make sure that you're checking us both out on Crossing Broad. You can listen to Anthony on Snow the Goalie, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere that you get your shows. You can also subscribe to redoctoberphilly.com. Daily newsletter Monday through Friday, comes between roughly 9 and 10:30 every day. I appreciate it if you do that. All right. We'll talk to you tomorrow.